We so announce that we are recording these broadcasts with the prior authorization of our guest and speaker, Professor Donald Broom, which we are pleased to receive and which will be introduced in a few minutes. This meeting today is special because it's taking place as part of the schedule of our graduate course that we offer here at the veterinary school. The course is entitled Livestock, Society and Environment, and it's offered in English. And this year, thanks to remote education, we were pleased to have foreign students in our group. We have participants from Ghana, India, and Nigeria, as well as Brazilians, of course, and that is a cause for joy for us. So then this will be the closing class of our course. During the course, we discussed which paper should we study on animal welfare. Our colleague Patrícia Tatemoto suggested the paper by Professor Donald Broom, and we quickly accepted the suggestion. Then she said, why don't we invite Professor Broom himself to discuss the paper with us? So I said, why not? And then she kindly invited Professor Broom, who immediately accepted our invitation. So it's a great privilege for me and for our class to be able to discuss the paper with the author himself. And he is not just any author, he is Professor Donald Broom, who many of you already know from the relevance of his work to animal welfare science. In this way, I would like to invite Patrícia to moderate this conference and to receive and introduce Professor Donald Broom. Patrícia Tatemoto, as you can see, she's working hard to make things happen. Okay, Patrícia is coordinating a campaign for the donkey sanctuary in the Americas against donkey skin trade. She completed her PhD at our School of Veterinary, addressing hypotheses about the effect of stereotyped behavior during pregnancy and fetal programming outcomes. During the master's degree at UNESP, she evaluated the effect of positive environmental stimuli on the emotionality of tilapia kept in social isolation. She has a degree in biology at UNESP also. Patrícia is interested in animal welfare and their behavioral, physiological, and epigenetic indicators. So Patrícia, I want to thank you very much again for arranging the participation of Professor Donald Broom and for moderating this conference. But before I give you the floor, I must kindly ask everyone to keep your microphones off during the presentation. The questions can be placed in the chat in English or in Portuguese, as you prefer, okay? We will issue the certificates as we do normally, making them available on our lab's website from December the 1st. Okay, so Patrícia, now it's with you. I really hope that things can work here. No, we have not.
Professor Gamiro.
Yes.
Can you hear Professor Broom from here, from the cell phone?
If I speak now, can you hear well enough?
Yes, as an astronaut, but we can hear, yeah?
Yes?
Yes. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you again, Professor Broom.
Is it good enough?
Yeah.
So I will introduce you, Professor Donald Broom. Is biologist, Emeritus Professor of Animal Welfare at University of Cambridge. And Professor Donald Broom has developed concepts and methods of scientific assessment of animal welfare and investigated cognitive abilities of animals, welfare of animals in relation to housing and transport, sustainable livestock production systems, behavior problems, attitudes to animals and ethics. And thank you very much, Professor Don. I'm sorry for these problems that we have with technology. And
I'm going to talk about sustainability and how animal welfare is related to sustainability. This is the plan of the talk. So I'll talk about the different components of sustainability, and then I give some examples of actions where there may be good for welfare and good for the environment, or maybe good for one and not for the other. So they'll give you a number of different examples, and then discuss how we might take decisions about what to do when there are differences between the different components of sustainability. Okay, can I confirm you can still hear me?
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. So, an important question about any kind of action or production system is whether or not it is sustainable. This is a definition of sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
So a system or a procedure is sustainable if it is acceptable to the public in general right now, and if what we expect to be its future effects are acceptable. And that refers to the availability of resources and the consequences of functioning and morality of action.
Mm-hmm.
So there are a lot of different components of sustainability because many things make something acceptable or not acceptable. And there is a link now in the minds of people generally between the quality of products and what is sustainable. Because if something is not sustainable, then often the product quality is judged as poor. So here are some of the factors. There can be, something could be unsustainable because of an effect on human welfare. The most obvious aspect of that is the health of consumers, the health of people. For many people also, the welfare of animals is an important factor which might make a product unsustainable. And there are other issues, particularly environmental effects. There's a series of different environmental effects. The whole world environment, like climate change, pollution, conservation, loss of biodiversity. And then there are topics like genetic modification. So sometimes people don't like a product because of genetic modification has been used.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual efficiency of usage of world resources is something which people are starting to take into account. And then some other human welfare aspects. If a product, a food product, for example, is coming from poor producers who are not getting properly paid for what they are doing, the money is going to some big company which is distributing in the world, then that is something which a lot of consumers now don't agree with. And so in many, throughout Europe and a number of other parts of the world now, you find labels on products saying this is fair trade. That means that the producer is getting a fair reward for what they have produced. But then there are issues like communities and their preservation, especially rural communities. So this is another area which is taken into account. But there are lots of with all these different components of sustainability, we need to consider all of them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you only think about animal welfare, then it may be you harm the environment. Or if you only think about greenhouse gases, then maybe there is something negative about animal welfare or some other factor. So we need to think about all the different components of sustainability. Now, when people are considering systems of production, some of the terms which are used in these analyses in order to take account of all the different components are life cycle analysis and considering a system and what are the externalities of systems. So life cycle analysis then was brought in initially because they wanted to, people wanted to consider what happened to a product during its production, while it is being used, and after it has been used. So what happens if you throw it away when you're finished with it? So you need to think about the whole life cycle of a product. And this is used for biological systems and for other kinds of systems. So life cycle analysis has been useful. And then when you think about a system, you have certain objectives in producing something, but there may be externalities. There may be effects that people didn't think of beforehand. And this was first discussed, especially in relation to using motor vehicles. Okay, so one example of an action which is good for the environment and good for welfare is if instead of burning straw from cereal production, the straw is used to improve the welfare of animals. When straw is burned, there is a very large amount of carbon dioxide produced. So this is a negative thing for a greenhouse gas for climate change. But if you can use the straw and you can use it to improve the welfare of animals like pigs or calves, other animals, then this is an action which is good for both both the environment and for the welfare of animals. This is another completely different example. Sometimes people are keeping wild animals as pets. They take animals from the wild and keep them as pets. This is an action which results in very poor welfare of the animals and also may have a negative effect on wild populations, so on conservation. A survey was done looking at all the scientific literature by the European Food Safety Authority in relation to bringing wild birds from various countries in the world into the European Union to be kept as pets. And it was what was found was that if it was a small bird, 90% of these birds die between the time that they are caught in the wild and the time they might be sold in a shop. Most of them die quite early after they are caught because they are very stressed, and you get stress-induced disease and shock effects. So, and even if it's a big, valuable bird like a macaw, a parrot, the mortality rate was still high. 70 to 80% of these birds died before they could be sold. So because of this, the European Union banned the import of wild-caught birds into any country in Europe. And the same kind of thing has been found with other animals like reptiles. If reptiles are caught in the wild, many of them die, and their welfare is very poor. So if you stop catching wild animals and keeping them as pets, then this is good for welfare and good for the environment. Here is a third example. What should be done about stray dogs, feral dogs? If you allow feral dogs, first of all, feral dogs often are killing wild animals and therefore having a negative effect on wildlife in an area. And also, feral dogs, although they are free to move around, they tend to have high levels of disease and to transmit a lot of disease. So if there are feral dogs in an area, then it is better to remove them from the wild, not to allow there to be free-ranging dogs, or not to allow free-ranging dogs which are not owned by anybody, but ideally to catch them, and if they can be returned to owners, to return them to owners, and if they can't, then to kill them humanely. And there is evidence, for example, in Chile that packs of dogs are important predators of wild animals. But some people don't like this idea, but it's something which is an action which is better for the environment and better for welfare in general, particularly the welfare of animals which might be caught by the dogs. Then here is another kind of example, and that is to change systems for keeping animals and for what we feed them on. Looking at semi-intensive silvopastoral systems which have been developed in Brazil and Mexico and Colombia and some other countries these sorts of systems, where they can be used, are good things for welfare, because the animals living in these kinds of systems, which have a shrub with edible leaves and trees, which often also can have edible leaves, they're very productive, and the animals have a better environment to live in. They have more shade, and they have more choice of what they are eating, so the welfare of the animals is better. But the productivity is large, and you have a much greater biodiversity in this area, and so the total number of birds and large predatory insects is increased, and this means that you have less ticks and less flies, which are causing diseases in the animals. So less disease in the animals. So there are some, if this is very well managed, you can have positive effects for the environment and positive effects for the welfare of the animals which are kept. This is another situation which is particularly relevant to India, and this is that in some countries in India there are free-roaming cows, and they do not allow them to be slaughtered. And what happens as a consequence is that there are many cows in India which are starving. Their welfare is very poor. They are sometimes killed or injured on the roads, and they have a negative effect on the environment. And so, in fact, not allowing older cows to be killed, which is what is happening in India, is causing very poor welfare of cows. And although it is supposed to protect the cows, its net effect is a negative one for welfare and for the environment. Here's a different kind of example. In many countries, people want to hunt wild animals, and land is preserved for hunting wild animals. So in this case, the conservation of the countryside is improved because of hunting. So we have a positive effect on conservation, but we know that when animals are hunted, for example, chased by packs of dogs, and the data shown here are what is the welfare of a deer like if the deer is being hunted by a pack of dogs? Well, the answer is that it's very negative. You have high levels of cortisol and lactate dehydrogenase isoenzyme 5, which are welfare indicators. So hunting is bad for welfare, but the land is being preserved. So in this case, there is a conflict between the two objectives. This is another example. If you intensify agriculture so that the production is more efficient, then you have more land which can be used for nature reserves. But if you intensify agriculture, then that can result in worse welfare for animals. It doesn't always, but sometimes it does. So that's a conflict then. Another example is in relation to zoos. Should we keep animals in zoos in order to conserve populations of wild animals? Well, the first problem is that keeping animals in zoos often means that the welfare of the animals in the zoos is not very good. Mm-hmm. But does it result in better breeding, better availability of animals for restocking the wild? And the answer is, in a few cases it does, but in many cases it doesn't. So an example is rhinoceros. Rhinoceros does not breed very well in captivity. Rhinoceros, if bred in captivity, doesn't adapt very well to the wild. So if you want to breed rhinoceros, you should breed them in extensive natural conditions and not in zoos. And that applies, it doesn't always work. But it does work for some other species. For example, the European bison has been reared in captivity and then can adapt to the wild conditions. So you need to know what it's different for different species. Here's another example, which is a difficult one. If you own a cat, should you allow your cat to go out and roam in the countryside? It's better for the welfare of the cat to be able to roam outside a house. On the other hand, you may have a disadvantage that they are killed on the road, so that's something which is a negative. But the big question is, what is their impact on wild populations? And a number of studies have been done which show that lots of cats kill many wild animals. Well, of course, sometimes they are kept to control rodents, and in that case, this is a positive thing to do, to allow them to roam, of course. But for many other cats, if they are allowed to roam, then they are causing a lot of poor welfare and death of wild animals. So it's a negative thing to do. And the answer to that is that if you have a cat, it should have a warning device like a bell, which informs wild animals that they are coming. And if it still catches and kills wild animals, then you should not allow it to leave the house. So this is a difficult area. Should we keep all farmed animals free range? That would improve the welfare of the animals, but it would use up a large amount of the Earth's surface for those animals, and you would have to cut down a lot of the world forest in order to do it, the remaining forest that we still have. So that free range is not. There are some negative aspects of keeping animals free range. You need to control it effectively. We also have issues about organic standards. The early organic standards banned all drug usage. That was very bad for the welfare of animals because you need therapeutic drugs for treating farmed animals. The current organic standards in most countries are much better. And so organic standards are not now saying no chemicals, they are saying only therapeutic chemicals. But it's something to bear in mind when considering organic standards. And then I'm finishing up with giving you some information about beef production systems, because I've done some recent work on this. I've been looking at different kinds of beef production systems and how they use resources and how the impact they have on different components of sustainability. The systems were extensive, unmodified pasture, feedlot, fertilized, irrigated pasture, and silver pastoral systems. And the land area was calculated, and the important message from this was there is a very large range of land area needed. So it's more than 10 times as much land is needed for extensive unmodified pasture as for the most efficient systems. And if you look at the use of conserved water, all the water which is used in production, water drunk, water which is put into troughs, polluted water, processing water, irrigation of crops, water for irrigation of pasture, water for fertilizer production. If you add up all of these things, the difference between the beef production system which uses the most water and the least water is 8 times. So we need to look carefully at the systems. And we should take account then somehow of all the components of sustainability. So we have a decision-making situation. How do we decide what to do? Well, the main thing I think is we need to compare the extent of each positive and negative consequence components of sustainability. And then we have to put them in some kind of unit so that we can put them together. We have to have a scoring system for each component of sustainability. But we might also think that some effects are so negative that we wouldn't ever accept them. So there are some levels which people think, oh, I wouldn't ever do that because it's an unacceptable thing to do. So sometimes it can't. You don't just add it up. You think something is too bad. But this is what happened with the analysis of beef production systems. I compared the different aspects of these beef production systems which I've mentioned, looking at human welfare, cattle welfare, land usage, water usage, efficiency of use of land, greenhouse gases, water pollution, and biodiversity. And looking at all of these, the total level of unsustainability, in other words, how much was negative, how much was negative was high for feedlot systems and was high for extensive grazing where the pasture becomes degraded. But if you have extensive grazing with the pasture not degraded, it was much better. And if you have fertilized irrigated pasture and no concentrates are fed to the animals, again, it was much better. And where you can use a silvopastoral system, this was the best system for beef production. So again, we have a big range between the best and the worst system. Beef production is not just one level of sustainability. The best systems are much better than the worst systems. So here are a few conclusions then. If you are evaluating a system, you should try to take account of all the components of sustainability, measure them precisely and scientifically, and here are some of the factors: welfare, biodiversity, worker satisfaction, land use, water use, greenhouse gases, harmful accumulation of pollutants like nitrogen and phosphorus. And then you should combine these. And in some cases, you still have to say something is too bad and I won't accept it. But in other cases, we can come to a conclusion about what the overall sustainability of particular systems are. And we should be looking at systems where there are several different systems for producing a particular kind of food. We should be looking at all the systems and not assuming that all the food is the same. Okay, and then I'm finishing up with some references to things that have been written about it. Okay, well, I'm sorry it was difficult for you, but I hope that you could follow what I'm saying.
Yes, we follow. Thank you very, very much. And now we can open for questions. If someone has any question, I can read for you, Professor.
Right.
Do you have questions? The question is from Professor Gamero. He said that you showed us that there are trade-offs and synergies among animal welfare and other dimensions or components, as you call, of sustainability. This is a very complex problem that some authors are calling wicked problem, a very difficult problem to solve. The main reason is a social question, that is, the different values of people. So my question is how to manage the social conflicts.
Yes, people do not all think the same. And so when we are talking about sustainability, there is variation in what different people will regard as sustainable because they have different values. However, I think we are starting to see greater uniformity across the world in values. But I think what we need to know for any particular product in any particular place, what is going to be accepted and what is not going to be accepted. And we need to educate, we need to inform people to provide information, good quality information about these different components of sustainability. But I agree with you that it will not always come to the same conclusion about what is sustainable. But in the long run, I think there will be increasing uniformity in thinking in the world. And you certainly see now around the world much more interest in biodiversity and animal welfare and greenhouse gases, and these topics are much more considered now, and people are starting to be a bit less selfish and human-centered in their thinking.
Perfect. Great. I also have a question. Actually, Carla has a question. I will read first from Carla. How to show people that systems like cage-free or organics are good for animals, for the welfare, and then guarantee food with more quality?
Yes, well, I think that 20 years ago, around the world, the methods of producing food, as long as it was not going to damage the health of the consumer, they are mostly decided by the farmers. And what is happening now is that consumers are rejecting some things as being poor quality. So now there are many people around the world, for example, who will not buy eggs if the hens have been kept in cages. They will not buy pig meat if the sows have been kept in stalls. And so this means they are saying this is not good quality food. Mm-hmm. This is an egg, but I would not buy it because I think it's a bad quality egg because of the method of production. So this is a change which is occurring, and it doesn't happen in one day. It takes some time to occur. But I think it is happening in every country that people are starting to say, I am concerned about animal welfare, and I will only buy this product if I can be sure that the welfare of the animals was good. And I will buy something else if I don't like it. So the power of the consumer is increasing really rapidly around the world. I know it's happening in Brazil, it's happening in every country, that consumers are really starting to have an impact on how things are produced. And this is why this whole sustainability issue, including animal welfare, is becoming more and more important. But I think the answer to your question is, firstly, you have to have reliable labeling of the product so that the consumer can decide, and you have to have good quality information, honest information, which is believed by the consumers about how good different systems are. If that information is available to consumers, then in the end there will be changes away from the systems which are really bad for any particular reason, or which are bad for more than one reason amongst the sustainability component.
Yes, thank you. And this is related with one of my questions, that sometimes maybe should be better to change the legislation based on scientific knowledge, because sometimes here in Brazil we see in other countries that sometimes the consumers is going slow with some topics that is consensual and acceptable. So maybe the legislation could help in these topics that we are sure that's unacceptable.
Yes, so consumers can have a substantial effect by what they buy and what they don't buy, and every individual can have an effect which will improve sustainability around the world. But in some cases it is much more efficient if it is done by government legislation. Mm-hmm. And people expect governments to be responsible for a number of these aspects of sustainability. They expect governments to prevent the sale of poisonous food, for example. And nowadays they expect the government to prevent the sale of things when the animal welfare is poor or when the environmental damage is too great. So we are but usually the consumer is acting the fastest. Producers are slower than consumers, but they are now taking account of consumers, and governments are in between. So governments have to deal with both consumers and producers, but having good quality legislation based on scientific evidence is clearly a very important thing to do. And it's gradually happening in countries around the world in relation to all of these aspects of sustainability, that governments are passing legislation which is improving the quality of the products and improving the sustainability of the production systems. But it does take quite a long time.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So we see that the change is by two main avenues: the consumer's behavior and also the legislation from the government. And Marcia Zanella, hi Marcia, she's asking Professor Don Broom how the COVID-19 global situation has affected the focus in sustainability in animal production.
Yes, so that's a very interesting. It's important at the moment and very interesting. I think that quite a lot of production has carried on exactly as it was and is not altered. So a lot of food production is the same now as it was at the beginning of the year before the COVID-19. I don't know that there have been. I don't know whether there have been changes. It would be interesting to have examples of it. But there certainly are some changes which are directly to do with avoidance of transmission of disease. So there are certainly people who are not eating products which might be contaminated with viruses from wild animals. So that's an obvious thing, but it is starting to happen, I think. Another thing which is happening is that because a large amount of the food sale is people are not able to go to individual shops and select products because they are buying and having food delivered. And this is happening a great deal certainly in Europe. It's a high proportion of people are having food delivered where they didn't before. And people are reducing the number of things that they buy. So there are specialist products which used to be selected by people purchasing things in shops where they are not selecting them now, but they have narrowed the range of the things which they consume. So I think this has been a change in food. It's not necessarily a change in relation to sustainability, but and I think there's a bit of a reduction in the amount of food which comes from wild sources or unreliable sources. So diversity of food is reduced a bit, and food which might be risky is reduced. But it will be very interesting to have more analyses of these things in the future, and there's a good research project here, several research projects.
Yes, and we have other questions here. This is my question. As you mentioned, the greatest human problem in the world is the rapid development of antibiotic resistance. Do you think that by improving the welfare of animals, we would use less antibiotics since the chronic stress is immunosuppressant?
Yes, I do. I think that's a really important thing. And actually, I am a co-author of a paper which is not published yet, in which this particular point is made. That is, if you take wild animals and you hold them in captivity, transport them, then that one of the consequences of that is that they are very much more likely to shed pathogens, to shed viruses or bacteria than they would do otherwise, because they are so stressed, because of the effect of stress on the immune system. Mm-hmm. There's also the same kind of thing happening, of course, in relation to domestic animals. So if domestic animals are treated badly, and that might include transporting them in bad conditions, then they are more likely to shed pathogens. And we know that this happens in farm animal transport, that they are producing more pathogens are getting out to other animals than infecting them, and more pathogens are getting out to humans if they are zoonotic pathogens. And so improving the welfare of animals reduces the amount of suppression of the immune system and reduces the shedding of viruses in particular, and bacteria in some cases as well. So where there is an effect, improving welfare would tend to reduce the transmission of pathogens. It doesn't mean it would solve all the virus spread problems by improving farm animal welfare, but it will go in that direction. It will improve it rather than to harm it.
Yes, perfect. So this is one kind of topic that we have the conclusion that's quite consensual. We don't have to do with trade-offs before make a decision. This is really interesting. Yeah. So we have another. Sorry?
Yes, I agree.
We have another question here from Professor Gamero. He says, FAO talk about sustainable intensification. And this, in many ways, means trade-offs between environmental impact and animal welfare. My question is, what, in your opinion, is the role of a FAO regarding animal welfare issues? I'm asking this because FAO is the main institution that deals with agriculture and livestock policies around the world.
Yes, it's interesting that FAO on its website and in its public pronouncements is particularly emphasizing that improving animal welfare is something important for the future. So they have been doing that for some time, and they are doing it vigorously. And so is, of course, OIE, the World Organization for Animal Health, is emphasizing that animal welfare is important. I think the issue of the trade-offs between different components of sustainability is a very tricky one, because it is the case that if you have more efficient production, then you are using less land and less resources than if you have less efficient production. So there is a pressure to go towards more efficient production. Mm-hmm. But we need to have improved efficiency without serious negative aspects. So improved economic efficiency, but worse animal welfare isn't in the long run going to be acceptable to consumers. So it won't be sustainable in the long run. So we need to, there is a trade-off, but you need to consider what are the points where the public will say, no, I won't have it, I won't buy it. So if you put extra animals in a feedlot, then you are leading to worse welfare. And if you have more feedlots, you are leading to worse welfare. And I think that there is generally going to be more rejection of systems which are unacceptable because of poor welfare or because of one of the other components of sustainability. But these kinds of trade-offs are a very important and complex thing to consider for the future. I agree very much with that.
Yes, and you mentioned a word that I think that must be the focus of these decisions, that's increasing the efficiency, but putting the calculation efficiency as including animal welfare as well, not just intensify.
Yes, and there are developments in the concept of efficiency. So I think that we have a situation where in the world where there are too many animals which are eating food which humans could eat directly. Mm-hmm. That is production of grain, cereal, grain, soya. These are products where we actually, the humans can eat the grain, the humans can eat the soya, and it is more efficient for them to do that rather than feeding it to livestock. So all of the systems which involve the feeding of grain and soya to farm animals, I think, will have to decline. On the other hand, animals which eat things which humans cannot eat in the long run is more efficient. So animals which are eating grass or leaves which cannot be eaten by humans, this is more of the future. So I think there should be an increase in the farming of herbivorous animals, including ruminants, including cattle, sheep, goats. And there should be an increase in the farming of herbivorous fish, and increase in efforts to convert leaves to insect protein, which we can eat, and also increase in efforts to produce, to have cell cultured protein. So something which is something like meat, but it comes from food sources which we can't use. These are the ways to go for the future. And that's not the way that things are going now. So in other words, that would mean a decrease in pig and poultry production, and an increase in in ruminant production, and particularly an increase in herbivorous fish and insects, where we can, and other animals which we can eat. So I think we're going to see a world revolution in how our food is being produced.
Yes, really interesting. And another question from Carla. She's asking, in your opinion, which is the better system to create swine, pig, and how to deal with social context of sows?
Well, I think that we are already in a situation where many of the public around the world know that if you keep sows in confinement, that their welfare is really poor. It's one of the worst things which people do to farm animals, to keep sows in stalls and tether systems. So I think that there is going to be a worldwide rejection of that. But then you can perfectly well then keep them in other systems. As I said, I think there might overall gradually be a general reduction in pig production because we could eat what the pigs are eating. But pigs can do one particular thing extremely well, and poultry can to some extent also. That is, they can eat food waste from humans. We are wasting an enormous amount of food. When a lot of people are eating a meal and 20% of it is wasted, they throw it away. Some shops are throwing away food. People producing food are throwing away food. We need to reduce that. And a lot of that can be used for pig production and also poultry and fish production. So we need to avoid wasting food. And I think that requires that all that food is treated so that you don't get disease transmission increase. So you have to do it carefully, but it certainly can be done. So I think there are going to be some significant changes in pig production. There has to be better welfare, and we have to think about what we are feeding them and whether it's actually efficient to feed them what we feed them now.
Perfect. And Professor Gamero has another question. Regarding the anthropomorphization of dogs and cats, the anthropomorphic attitude we have with dogs and cats, do you think that we are exaggerating?
I think that we are going to continue to keep dogs and cats, but I hope that the average person who is keeping them will try harder to understand them and communicate better with them. We now know much more about the behavior and communication systems in both dogs and cats and how well they can communicate with humans. And I think we should use that information better, not just for dogs and cats, but to other species as well. So I think a better understanding is an important thing to do. And I agree with that it is not a good idea to treat them as if they were humans when they are not humans. We can treat them as friends without them being. We all have friends which are not humans. I think almost everybody knows some non-human animals which are their friends, and so they can still be friends. But you don't have to think of them as if they were exactly humans. You can respect them because they are dogs or cats as well. So anthropomorphizing needs to go back a bit. Has been occurring a bit too much, but understanding of the animals is a really important thing for the future.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I have another question. I don't know if someone have another question here. You can ask in Portuguese and I can translate. Feel free if you want. And I couldn't agree more with your definition, Professor, about sustainable procedures and systems that should be acceptable now, and also the expected future effects. So, but however, if we consider, for instance, epigenetic changes, we are just now understanding how some chemical components is affecting our genome. So I understand that we should predict based, of course, on our current knowledge, but sometimes we are making decisions when actually we don't know the effects and the outcomes, the consequences in the future, like these epigenetic changes. We are using components that now we know that is changing our epigenome. So maybe we should apply the precautionary principle in this case, or what is your opinion?
Well, I think that these kind of studies, and I know that you have personally been involved in them, and that some of the really important work has been done from the University of São Paulo. We now understand better that bad experiences for mother and for father during the production of eggs and sperm can cause effects in the next generation. And that means we need to think more about ourselves, humans. We need to think more about the animals which we manage, including our farm animals and our companion animals, and to try to avoid doing things to them which are going to have damaging effects on the next generation. So although we have been aware of some of these things in the past, that is things like if a mammal is starving during pregnancy, then there can be effects on the next on their offspring. We now know it's a much wider range of negative effects which can cause damage to the next generation. So we need to be thinking more about how we are treating the animals. And one of the biggest things for farming is we are actually treating male animals used for breeding rather badly. And those male animals, we now know, because of the poor welfare of those animals, there could be negative effects for the next generation. There could be effects on the sperm production, which by epigenetic effects are changing things in the next generation, and maybe even more than one generation. So we need to know more about this, and management of animals in general, as well as management of humans by themselves and by others and their families. People need to be thinking more about the negative consequences which can be passed on to other generations. And it's relevant to animal welfare, it's relevant to, obviously, the animal welfare includes human welfare in this case.
Perfect, thank you very much. And this is the research of the group of Professor Zanella, where I have done my PhD and have learned a lot. And also Thiago Bernardino, my friend, he's studying exactly the male welfare of pig. This is really interesting. And Carla has another question. What do you think about the creation of laboratory meats, cellular agriculture?
Yes, I think it's going to be a very important thing in the future. I have been trying to do calculations on what are the sustainability aspects of it, but it is already clear that there are some positive aspects for sustainability, because you can take cells from an animal with hardly any adverse effect, only maybe just a small injection, and you can take cells from an animal and then you can culture these. They replicate and then you can use them in order to produce meat. And this, it's already clear that this is going to have a big impact in the world. It's going to change farming quite a lot, because quite a bit of farming will be in buildings instead of being animals. You don't need the animals, and so it changes how things are going to be done. I do also think that there is it's very important to check it very carefully that there aren't potentials for disease transmission. It should be possible to do it without disease transmission. I mean, it clearly is possible to do it without any disease transmission, but it does need to be very carefully checked. But I think that problem will be solved. It's already being solved, and there are lots of commercial companies being set up to try to produce cell-cultured meat. And I think producing something which is not very different from the foods which are being eaten now, but producing them without any harmful effect on the welfare of animals is very effective to very many people. So just for that reason, it's important. But I think it should also be important in relation to the usage of world resources. We should be able to use world resources better by sophisticated cell-cultured meat production.
Perfect. And Professor Gamero has a comment. Professor Broom has a very broad view of the world and of life. He can always see beyond. Thank you for sharing your experience with us. And Professor Gamero would like to thank you, Professor Broom, and Patrícia, and myself, very much for the kindness and effort of you and me to make this communication work. Very nice talking and discussions. I'd like to ask if someone has questions. Do you have any questions? No? Professor Broom, do you have anything to add in our great, amazing discussions?
I think we, despite the difficulties, we managed to talk about a lot of interesting things. So thank you for the very interesting questions, to everybody for the very interesting questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Dom. Professor
I have a
Gamero.
question. I'm sorry, Patrícia. May
Yes.
I?
Yes,
Thank
but
you.
sorry, Mari, I don't think that Professor Broom
He's
can
not there?
hear.
Ah,
I will
okay.
repeat, or if you wanna.
All right.
Sorry.
All right, now 1 minute. Just wait. Thank you.
You're welcome. We have one more question.
Okay, that's fine.
I think it's faster if I tell you, okay?
Okay.
I was thinking about his example of roaming cows in India. And my question, do you want to tell him this?
She has a question about the house in India, and I'm hearing, and I will
Okay.
repeat.
He mentioned that we had a problem slaughter and bad welfare conditions. And the question is, are we in a good position of saying what's the best for the animals, in this case, roaming animals, let's say? If they could choose, or if we could choose for them, what would we do? Maybe, I don't know, abbreviating poor life conditions by the slaughter, is that an alternative or not? How can we be sure of what's the best for them, and how can we do this without a too anthropocentric vision of what is life and what is the right of living and things like that? Thank you.
I think, Professor, you have heard part of the question.
Yeah, part of it.
What would be your solution for the cows in India?
So I think that the big problem which has occurred in India is there are two problems. One is that there are too many animals which are left without enough food, they are starving and they are diseased, and this should not be permitted. So that's the first thing. But actually, there are also very many people in India who are trying very hard to provide for the cows because they consider them to be important and holy animals. So there is a mixture of what is happening to them. But the big problem is if somebody is keeping cattle and they are not allowed to kill the old ones when they stop being productive, then they can't afford to buy new ones. And so they actually have a big difficulty with providing for the dairy industry in India. If people can't kill their old animals, then that actually makes it very hard for the whole industry. So I think that it should be possible for people to maybe not themselves to kill the animals because they don't want to do that for religious reasons, but to pass it to other people who will do it. And that it should be done in India, because what is happening at the moment is that there are very many cattle being exported long distances from India because they can't sell them and they can't kill them. So the answer is to kill them in India. It can be done by Christian or Muslim or other people who are willing to kill them. And you should have legislation in India which allows that. And there used to be such legislation, but it was changed by the current government in India. So it's what they brought in as a law to say we shouldn't be killing cows actually is causing serious problems for cows as well as for people.
Yes. Thank you very much. Anyone else? Professor Adroaldo Zanella, he's saying, Don, your contribution to animal welfare in the world is truly inspiring. Thank you very much. This is Professor Adroaldo.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Adroaldo. Thank you to all my friends who are listening.
Many people are saying thank you very much because the presentation, the discussion was really inspiring and interesting. I'm grateful for this experience. Thank you. And this was Ana Luisa. Excellent approach of subject. Thank you for the opportunities, Renato. And thank you from many people. Shall we close our session?
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you very much, Augusto. It has been very good to talk to you and to have this interesting discussion.
Thank you very much, Professor. And
okay.
Yes, Professor
Right.
Augusto?
Yes, I would like to thank you, Patrícia and Professor Broom, again. It was very, very nice talk and discussion.
Okay.
And I would also like to thank all the participants for your presence.
Bye.
Professor Gamiro, oops.
He left, okay. No problem. It was very, very nice to do all the report.
Sorry.
Okay, as I was saying, I'd like to thank you all, okay, for your presence, and we apologize for the communication problems. We are still learning how to deal with these technologies, but I think that in the end, everything worked good enough. So Patrícia, again, thank you very much for your idea and for your effort to make it happen, okay? And thank you all. Have a nice, very nice day. See you, and bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.